This is Ahval Online, meeting point of accurate news and free comment on the current affairs of Turkey. Welcome to our podcast series.
Hello and welcome to Talking Turkey. I'm your host, Ahval editor David Lepeska, and with me today is Aykan Erdemir, Senior Director of the Turkey Program at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies and a member of Turkey's parliament for the main opposition CHP from 2011 to 2015. Hello, Aykan, and welcome.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Sure. We are speaking on Friday, March 20th. Turkey's coronavirus cases doubled again on Thursday, nearing 360, a week after the first case appeared. 4 people in Turkey have now died of COVID-19, and analyst Michael Tanchum pointed out on Twitter that Turkey's one-week growth curve is sharper than that of Italy, which today, of course, has more coronavirus deaths than any other country, including China, where it all began. The number of cases in Turkey are expected to spike with the arrival on Friday of 15-minute diagnosis kits from China. So, after steering clear of coronavirus for weeks, Turkey now appears to be in the thick of it and fighting to avoid a mass outbreak. Do you think all this was inevitable, or is it largely the result of a sluggish response on the part of the government?
First of all, the numbers might not be presenting the real picture here. That is, the first confirmed case came quite late. As physician Ergin Koçyıldırım states in a recent op-ed he penned for the National Interest, he argues that Turkey was the last of the major economies in the world, the last country with a population over 50 million to have a confirmed case. So potentially Turkey had earlier cases, and only now the numbers are adding up. So maybe the curve isn't as steep as it appears, but at the same time, it might be the case that, as Dr. Koçyıldırım warns about, there might have been an earlier cover-up, and the picture might be more grim than it looks. Hence, had Turkey responded earlier, meaning had Turkey confirmed its first case earlier, and using that to introduce stricter enforcement of various rules and regulations, I think the fight against coronavirus could have been more effective. At this point, there is, let's say, a mixed track record. On the one hand, we see a willingness to tackle this at the national, at the local levels with strict measures. But on the other side, there seems to be, let's say, a lack of transparency, a lack of clear communication, and also a lack of trust.
People in Turkey are stocking up on colonia, or alcohol-heavy cologne, to combat the virus. Schools, universities, gyms, cinemas, shops, cafes, and bars have been closed, while mosques have also been closed for Friday prayers. Turkey on Thursday finally canceled all professional sporting events, and in his speech on Wednesday, President Erdogan announced a 15.4 billion aid package to boost the economy and warned, quote, "None of our citizens must leave their homes or get into contact with anyone unless absolutely necessary." I'm wondering, what's your sense of how Turkish citizens are coping with this? Are they staying home like Erdogan advised? Are they remaining optimistic, or is there a growing paranoia?
I think it's very heterogeneous, meaning some are panicking, are sticking with their regimen, staying at home, following directions closely, whereas others are completely disregarding them. And hence, this will end up being a very complicated case. That is, there will be those infected individuals spreading the virus, not necessarily heeding the advice of government or experts, and then others who will abide by all the regulations. The key issue here is, I think, the semi-transparent nature of Turkey's crisis management. That is, according to Center for Disease Control, the U.S. Agency, clear, consistent, and science-based information is from trusted and respected sources is key to fighting any epidemic. Now, given Turkey's media environment, given Turkey's political environment, I would argue that this is very difficult to provide in Turkey. Turkey has destroyed its trusted independent media sources, its non-governmental organizations, purged its public intellectuals, suppressed dissemination of critical views. So in this environment of lack of trust, lack of transparency and accountability, it's extremely difficult to, let's say, fight an effective battle against a coronavirus epidemic. So I think this is going to be the key challenge that Turkey will continue to face.
Erdogan's Justice and Development Party, or AKP, has been in power for nearly 18 years, and one of its most widely praised achievements is revolutionizing the country's healthcare system, which has included better emergency and pediatric care, universal access, and significantly curbing child mortality. Yet now it appears to be falling short in the face of this pandemic. The Turkish Medical Association has warned that the number of cases, as you say, is significantly higher than those announced by the health ministry. More than 10,000 returnees from the Umrah pilgrimage to Mecca have been quarantined for about a week, and there have been reports that some have been trying to escape the unhygienic conditions. And Turkish authorities have revealed very little info, as you say, about the confirmed cases, particularly the locations of the infections as well as the deaths. You've said it's been semi-transparent. More broadly, how would you assess how Turkey's healthcare system and its government has handled the corona crisis so far?
First of all, we have to state that since the 2001 economic crisis, first beginning with various projects to mitigate social risk, and then with the World Bank-led health transformation program, Turkey has relatively strong institutions when it comes to healthcare policy and social policy. So this started right around 2001, especially with Kemal Dervish, and then continued especially during the first 5 to 10 years of the AKP rule. And during that period, Turkey institutionalized a completely refurbished social security and universal health insurance program, provided universal health coverage as of 2008, transitioned to a single purchaser model, introduced a family medicine system, and integrated public hospitals, vastly increasing the number of healthcare workers, facilitating greater access to healthcare. And all of this resulted in an increased life expectancy in Turkey of 7 years. Now, what that puts Turkey now in a very different place. That is, Turkey is now an aging society. It has good access to health services, even among the poorest segments and even among the refugees, but not necessarily among the purged dissidents who have no healthcare access. Turkey has a good ratio of intensive care units, but again, purged talent, nurses and physicians from those hospitals. Ironically, one of Turkey's top coronavirus experts has been purged and is now living abroad. And recently we have seen some of the purged healthcare professionals saying, allow us back into our profession. We are willing to work without pay. So again, we see some strong institutions in the making over the last decade or 2 decades. But at the same time, we see some shortcomings, mainly for political reasons. So I would argue that although Turkey has a much stronger healthcare system compared to other countries in the Middle East, some of these political shortcomings can come to haunt Turkey. Now, one key risk I see here is one of Erdogan's pet projects, namely mega hospitals.
Wait. Before we get to that, can I just clarify? It sounds like you're saying that the purges of some 150,000 mostly public servants in the wake of the failed coup of 2016 is undermining Turkey's coronavirus response, and that it might lead to more cases and more deaths. Is that right?
So I'm trying to give a gray picture here. That is, on the one hand, Turkey has one of the strongest institutions and legal framework and healthcare access in the Middle East. That is a key strength. But at the same time, the Turkish government has shot itself in the foot by purging precious talent from the medical sector, including some of its top, coronavirus researchers, and hence undermine its own capacity. But nevertheless, I think overall, the Turkish healthcare sector, institutionally, is well positioned to meet the challenge as long as there is good governance, there is good management of this crisis. And that is where the Turkish government can fall short.
You mentioned the mega hospitals. Let me just lead you into that. Last May, Erdogan oversaw the opening of one of the world's largest hospitals, Ankara City Hospital, which cost €1 billion and has an area the size of about 100 football pitches. Even back then, when it opened, critics complained that the single hospital model made it harder to control the spread of infections, which is why most major hospitals today have begun building several separate buildings in recent years. In addition, the public-private partnership model Turkey embraced to build Ankara City Hospital and a dozen other mega hospitals has turned problematic in the wake of Turkey's 2018 currency crisis and again today as the lira sinks amid coronavirus fears. What's your view on this mega hospital model today?
Now, Erdogan's vanity project, namely the mega hospitals, are becoming a major liability in the run-up to Turkey's coronavirus epidemic. There were 17 hospitals planned, but because of delays and cost overruns, 7 of them came to a halt. And then the public-private partnership model, which was great for Erdogan's cronies because there were all these lucrative deals in the healthcare sector, is now becoming a financial liability. That is, given the devaluation of the Turkish lira and given the loans and the deals for these public-private partnerships were denominated in euros, now it's becoming extremely challenging for the government to make these payments at a time when the Turkish public budget is under enormous strain. So that's the financial risk. But then, more importantly, there is a medical risk. There is the infection risk, because Turkish experts have warned right from the very start that these mega hospitals, for example, the one in Ankara, is the size of 100 football fields, poses great risks because, first of all, management is very difficult, hygiene is very difficult, containment of outbreaks is very difficult, even traffic and access is very difficult. So I think Erdogan will learn the hard way a lesson that bigger is not always better. He has built the biggest mosque in Istanbul, biggest airport in Istanbul, biggest hospital in Ankara,
Presidential palace,
biggest presidential palace in Ankara. So he has this fixation with large edifices, large monuments as a proof of his success. But during a coronavirus epidemic, these mega hospitals will actually become part of the problem itself.
Hmm. Let's shift, if we can, to Syria and Idlib province, where some 3 million displaced people remain squeezed between Turkish troops and the Russia-backed forces of Syrian President Bashar Assad. Erdogan spoke to the leaders of Germany, France, and Great Britain on Tuesday and reportedly made little progress on any agreement for Idlib and for the refugee issue. What, in your view, is the stumbling block here? Why do you think Turkey and Europe are unable to come to some agreement on refugees and aid to Idlib?
Now, I think, Damascus and Tehran and Moscow have so far weaponized, instrumentalized refugees very skillfully. And in turn, Ankara has instrumentalized, weaponized refugees in its dealings with the European Union. And all these strategies built on the weaponization of refugees are, I think, need to come to a halt during what now the World Health Organization calls a global pandemic around the coronavirus. That is, the refugees, the asylum seekers on the Turkish-Greek border, the displaced Syrians in Idlib. These are now all at-risk populations for outbreaks of coronavirus. And I think we are beginning to see some precautions, some prudence on the part of all of the actors involved. We are seeing, Turkey unwinding its weaponization of refugees on the EU border. We are seeing, Turkey and Russia, coming to the negotiation table, starting joint patrols on the M4 motorway in Idlib. But the caveat is, this is a temporary halt to weaponization, and it in no way provides a sustainable solution either on the EU-Turkey end of the issue or on the Turkey-Russia, Turkey-Assad regime end of the issue. The reason being, there are, I would argue, unbridgeable differences when it comes to Ankara's approach to these issues and Ankara's counterparts. On the EU side, would Ankara succeed in extracting a visa liberalization policy from the EU? Would Ankara succeed in extracting kind of further financial aid in the form of a new refugee deal from the EU? Time will tell. When it comes to Idlib, can Ankara find again a sustainable settlement with Russia when it comes to Idlib? It's easier said than done, because we have seen what happened on March 15th with the first Turkish-Russian joint patrol, as local residents of Idlib blocked the path of the patrol and forced Turkey and Russia to cut it short. So this shows that the situation, especially in Idlib on the ground, is extremely complex, particularly when it comes to the Al-Qaeda-linked HTS forces. As long as there is this element that Turkey partially depends on in Idlib, hostilities could easily flare up, because we have to keep in mind that Ankara does not have full control on the HTS. And in fact, Ankara itself recognizes the HTS as a terrorist organization, and there will always be pressure from the Assad regime and Russia for Turkey to take action against the HTS, which we know Turkey has not been willing to do so far. So these outstanding issues will remain, preventing a full settlement.
You mentioned unbridgeable differences. A ceasefire has been in place in Idlib for about 2 weeks now, but on Wednesday, Syrian state media reported that reinforcements were arriving from neighboring provinces and that Assad's forces were preparing to resume their offensive to take Idlib. On Thursday, the next day, Aid Group Syria campaign said, as you suggested, that it was just a matter of time before coronavirus reached the masses of displaced people in Idlib, which today has only about 60 hospital beds following Russian and Syrian targeting of healthcare facilities. This seems like a perfect storm of humanitarian disaster, but it almost sounds like you're optimistic that all sides will be able to respond and deal with the crisis in the coming weeks.
My only optimism is given the enormity of the challenge with the coronavirus pandemic, the sides will slow things down. That's what I'm hoping in the short term. That is, now they have a bigger issue to deal with. And we have seen what great difference coronavirus made on Turkish policy. Within only weeks of Turkey opening up its land and sea borders to Greece and Bulgaria, to encourage asylum seekers to go to the EU. We have seen Turkey first shutting down the sea border, then shutting down the land border, then even going as far to sentence harshly some of the human traffickers. So even Turkey, from the end of February to mid-March, realized that this is now a whole different playing field. Even Erdogan, who was keen to extract some concessions from the European Union by weaponizing the refugees, is now dealing first and foremost with the coronavirus epidemic at home. I think this is going to result in a temporary halt to, let's say, military adventurism or political adventurism on other fronts. The governments, both state and non-state actors involved here, have their hands full. Economically, they are overstretched. Medically, they are overstretched. And it would be foolish, to say the least, if during this time of crisis, they go back to the battlefield. They go back to, igniting military and political hostilities on the ground. So that's my hope.
Last couple questions about Turkish politics, starting with what seems like a stunning coincidence. Former Deputy Prime Minister and AKP co-founder Ali Babacan finally launched his own political party, the Deva Party, meaning remedy in Turkish, on the same day last week that Turkey announced its first coronavirus case. The party positions itself as West-friendly and an advocate of the rule of law and strong democracy, and some have compared it to Turgut Özal's center-right Motherland Party, which led Turkey in the 1990s. What's your view? Might Babacan be the remedy for Turkey?
Now, let me first begin by saying that Babacan was quite late in launching the party, but as promised, he initiated a big tent party that is not necessarily the AKP 2.0, but that is more like a return to what Turgut Özal tried to achieve with his Motherland Party back in the 1980s, bringing in, center-right, center-left, secular and religious and Turkish and Kurdish. At the same time, although Babacan was late to launch the party, the timing ended up being quite opportune. As you said, the Remedy Party sounds very appealing at a time when Turkey is going through major challenges in the economy as well as in the medical field. And, Deva, remedy in Turkish has a, very strong connotation of a cure, of a remedy. So for political communication reasons, I think the timing ended up being right. Though the key challenge for Babacan at this point is to prove that besides the framing and besides the big tent appeal of his party, he can recruit talent across the political spectrum, mobilize them effectively during these challenging times, and also withstand pressure from the government. Because if Babacan is expecting that this is going to be an easy ride, he is mistaken. Erdogan has again and again proven his willingness to play hardball with his former colleagues, as well as with the opposition parties across the political spectrum. In fact, we are now seeing not only a crackdown on the pro-Kurdish HDP party in Turkey, People's Democratic Party, but we are now seeing the same kinds of pressure and removal of mayors from office when it comes to the main opposition, the pro-secular Republican People's Party, the CHP. Hence, it wouldn't be surprising if we see other forms of political harassment targeting Erdogan's two former colleagues, Davutoğlu, former Prime Minister Ahmet Davutoğlu, and former Deputy Prime Minister Ali Babacan. I think in this, challenging atmosphere, what might work to Babacan's advantage is his strong technocratic credentials when it comes to the economy, his performance, his relatively unblemished record within the AKP. I think it's clear that the economy, besides coronavirus, the economy will be the main issue in Turkey. There will be, massive budget deficits. There will be a significant devaluation. There will be a spike in unemployment, and people will look for an alternative. And I think Babacan is well positioned to offer himself as a former, wunderkid of, the early AKP periods, kind of economy czar. But again, the challenge there is, I think the electorate will want to see more than Babacan. They will want to see, a competent team of economists, social policy experts, finance professionals. So I think ultimately this will not only be about messaging, but also about human resources.
You touch on what seems to be the key issue after the losses in last year's elections, the rise of Istanbul Mayor Ekrem İmamoğlu, serious economic troubles, and now Babacan and Davutoğlu launching their splinter parties weeks before the government appears to mishandle the coronavirus pandemic. Do you see Erdogan and the AKP as in serious political trouble? Turkey has no elections scheduled for more than 3 years, but how might the party fare if an election were held today?
Now, there will be two key challenges to the AKP in the upcoming months. One is the way in which they deal with coronavirus. And it seems that Turkey has almost missed the window of opportunity to flatten the curve. So the public will hold the AKP accountable for failing to flatten the curve in Turkey. The second issue will be the economy. And Erdogan is exposed there because he has no one else to blame but his son-in-law, Berat Albayrak, who is the Minister of Economy and Finance. And basically, Albayrak will continue to be a major liability for Erdogan because it's under Albayrak's watch that Turkey wasted billions of dollars of foreign reserve to prevent a devaluation. Turkey used a lot of its funds under the central bank, under the unemployment fund, for election spending and for propping up the lira. And now when Turkey needs a stimulus package the most, when Turkey needs these extra resources to come to the average citizen's help, the coffers are empty. And can Erdogan turn the finger to his son-in-law? Can he replace him? Or is he beyond the point of no return? That is, will the public inevitably hold the AKP in its entirety, the Erdogan government in its entirety, for the imminent economic crisis? Not only in Turkey, but of course, this is all around the world, in all the emerging markets particularly, and it will compound the crisis in Turkey. So these two factors, I think, will be a key challenge to Erdogan. But let me introduce a caveat here. Erdogan's political brilliance lies in his ability to turn crises into opportunities. And this time around, too, Erdogan will try to turn the economic crisis as well as the corona pandemic into an opportunity to solidify his rule. He will most probably use this opportunity to introduce some new draconian measures. And he will have the advantage of pointing to other examples from around the world. And he will say, these are, challenging times. This is a unique moment. Look at what Angela Merkel said. She said this was the biggest challenge since the Second World War, which means, the government needs, new draconian, moves, steps, which could mean further restricting political activity, further restricting freedom of expression, further restricting media freedoms and the social media. So I wouldn't be surprised if Erdogan emerges from this challenge with greater political power, with much less legitimacy, but greater political power, greater coercive power. And that, of course, that would spell a very dark scenario for Turkey's future. Of course, let me also provide an optimistic scenario, and that is if the Turkish electorate has had enough, and if they are able to point the finger to the people who are really accountable and hold them accountable, namely the Erdogan government accountable, then Turkey's opposition, which has had a good streak of wins lately, which has a growing ability to forge coalitions, to bridge divides, to project hope and energy, then we could have, a peaceful democratic transition, and Turkey can gradually leave behind this competitive authoritarian phase in its history and start rebuilding Turkey's inclusive, liberal democratic institutions and polity once again.
Interesting. So we should keep our eyes peeled for more authoritarian steps on the part of the Turkish government and perhaps a popular response from the people.
Definitely. I think the options are, both there.
Aykan Erdemir of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, thank you so much for your time and insight. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for having me. It has been a great pleasure.
You can follow Ahval News Online podcast series through Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Google Podcasts, SoundCloud, and Spreaker. All you need to know about Turkey is here for your ears, mind, and attention. Thank you for listening to our podcast.